Teresa Daniel. I'm a Dallas County Commissioner and very involved in environmental clean air issues, primarily because of the health impact they have across our citizenry. And Dallas County, as we'll get into, is just so lucky to be at a location that gets challenged every day with environmental issues. And so I'm here specifically to say, okay, what are the next steps and how do we move all this forward?
And Cindy's a member of our board of directors and is in charge of our PM committee that has a fleet of portable monitors. You want to introduce yourself and what your background is?
Yes, so my name is Cindy Hua. I chair the Particulate Matter Education Committee with Downwinders at Risk. So I am in charge of all the portables that we put out in the Dallas community. I lead the monitor trainings and other workshops, virtual and in person. When I'm not doing that, I am a PhD student at SMU studying education.
So I'm glad y'all are here because we're very excited about this project. This is a really unprecedented attempt in the state of Texas, at least, to build an independent air quality monitoring network that is as good as the EPA's or anybody else's, with nothing but nonprofits really doing the operational stuff and building it. From the grassroots groups that you see represented up there to the elected officials, the entities and so on, every one of these particular institutions has a role to play in this network, and each one brings their own kind of expertise or resources to the table. And together we've been able to build this incredible thing that even folks with more resources than we have not been able to. I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to build this up from scratch. And what we're going to try to do is give you some kind of baseline to establish a common pool of knowledge first about how we got here and what's going on, and then we'll talk about the actual network itself more in detail, and then the ramifications of that work, because I think this has a lot of very, very long-term implications for policy, urban planning, public health policy, traffic lights, everything you can think of in terms of air pollution or idling cars or anything like this can be done through this monitoring system, or at least aided through the data that you get through this system. So we're going to do this first, and they tell me that this works. And so we'll try this out. We'll test this theory and see if this actually, look at that. So monitoring air is very, very important because we breathe so much of it. In terms of pathways for toxins, there's food, there's water, there's air usually. Those are the three primary pathways. If you get your drinking water from a well, you should be always concerned about your well water quality, right? But most of us get our water from the utilities. And we consume a lot more air, as you can see, than we do water. And unlike food and water, the air is not labeled. Right? If you buy something at the grocery store, it comes with the ingredients on it. City of Dallas is always inspecting the water there, but not so much the air that goes into your lungs. In Dallas-Fort Worth, since the 1980s and through the 90s and into this century, our air policy has been directed by one major thing, smog or ozone. We've had this problem now for over 30 years since the extension of the Clean Air Act in 1991, and we had it actually for 10 years prior to that. And these monitors are located in places to pick up smog primarily. These are EPA official monitors that are then serviced by our state agency. So the EPA doesn't service its own monitors, they give the contract out to the state and they do it. And these are located in areas, as you can see, mainly by highways or north of highways, downwind of highways, to keep track of area smog, not for any other kind of pollutant. And there are only 20 of them in a 10-county area, and really only 10 in the inner circle in the greater Dallas-Fort Worth area. There is, out of all of those monitors, there's only one in Dallas County that actually monitors for particulate matter, which is the pollutant that my group is very specifically concerned about because it's so pervasive and so insidious to public health, as the last 20 years of research shows. Dallas County is about the size of Rhode Island. Rhode Island has 7 EPA monitors that pick up PM. Dallas County has 1. Why particulate matter? Well, it's the intersection of what we can do in terms of monitoring, the accuracy of that monitoring, and also how pervasive it is and how harmful it is. The last 20 years of research has shown that PM that you breathe can not only cause you heart and lung problems, it passes through the lining of your lungs and goes directly into your blood system, and then goes to every blood organ, right, every collection of blood in your body. So there's no organ in your body that's immune from damage to this kind of pollution, as they've shown. And it mimics lead in a lot of ways, and it robs you of IQ. There's a lot of links to autism, early dementia, Parkinson's disease. It affects you developmentally. It robs you of personality. It makes you antisocial. It makes you more depressed. Besides giving you diabetes, blindness, cancer, all those other things you might expect, it has a lot of other effects as well. And there are hot spots. Smog, if you could think of it like a blanket that kind of covers everything evenly, PM is like a sparkler on 4th of July, where it could be bad on one end of the block, but perfectly fine on the other. It's very localized in its effect. And here's what we're talking about. This is a study that the UTD folks did under Dr. Laurie that took a car around to measure PM on just the roads. And all the blue spots were fine, but the red spots are the hot spots. And so you can see they're spread out. You wouldn't necessarily, you could drive down one road and not find any problem at all and drive another one and find 5 hot spots. So you need a real density of monitors to know what's going on in a community. For instance, a community like Joplin, where we are right now, putting up these kinds of monitors. This is a community that is pound for pound probably the most heavily contaminated in Dallas. West Dallas has perhaps a larger facility in GAF, but they have more people. Here you have maybe 500, 600 households surrounded by all of this. There's a batch plant there by Loop 12 besides the traffic itself. There's a Union Pacific switchyard with about 20 tracks. And by the way, the railroad companies all send their most polluting, oldest locomotives after their cross-continental runs, they send them to switchyards to live out their life. So you get the dirtiest locomotives here. The Tamco Roofing Materials Plant, which is a asphalt shingle factory, just like GAF is in West Dallas. The largest asphalt batch plant is there right by the Tamco facility to feed them asphalt. And on one side, they have the beautiful Trinity River, which is what we're trying to get them reconnected to, right? They're supposed to be the front window for the Great Trinity Forest and all that. Instead, their front window is an industrial, apocalyptic scene if you drive down 310 there. So, some benefits. Just being there with the monitor discourages bad actors. Plano, they're using these monitors to coordinate their intersections, so you don't spend as much time idling in traffic as you would otherwise. You track accidents, right? When things blow up or you have an accidental release of something, you could provide warnings to people in real time. You can correlate school absenteeism, productivity at work, etc., with levels of PM and air pollution in the air. You can correlate all kinds of health problems with them, which we're trying to do in a separate study in Joppy, doing a community health survey and tracking it with the levels of pollution day by day and seeing if they do correlate and what the rates of illnesses are and so forth for Joppy compared to the rest of the city and state. And then identifying hotspots. This is what a big monitor used to look like. You know, those big computers that used to take up the whole room, those were your personal computers. These are the equivalents left over from the last century. This is what those same machines can look like now. And if you go upstairs to the exhibit hall, you'll find one of our big motherships that has to be hardwired sitting there along with a version of one of these things, which is solar powered. And we got involved in 2017, 2018 when Purple Air and some of these other brands just started hitting the market and you could actually afford to buy personal air monitors for the first time that were fairly reliable. We've always been, my group has always been kind of on the forefront of trying to use knowledge, the latest science on behalf of these distressed communities, and we saw this as an opportunity. And we actually used them out in Joppy the first time, there by the railroad tracks and other places, to find out that in fact the air was pretty bad out there. The fight was over a new batch plant that wanted to locate in Joppy. The city said, oh, the air is fine based on a monitor 9 miles away, that one I showed you earlier, that EPA monitor. And we said, no, it's not. We'll go out there with our own monitors and tell, and that's exactly what these folks did. It was the first time that portable monitors had ever been used in a fight like this, as far as we know. We want to make the system kind of like this system in Taiwan, which is now an old slide. It's probably much more dense than this, but this is the kind of density that we're looking for, where you get, hundreds, if not thousands of monitors to tell you what's going on, and you track plumes of air pollution like you would a cold front or a windstorm through the city. Here's a map where you have one mothership The one that's upstairs, for instance, the big hardwired one that's kind of about 3 feet tall, and then that one picks up the signals of the other 10 in the pod. So we sell you, the UTD folks will build you a big mothership and then give you 10 other solar-powered monitors to put around that in a dense pod, and that's how they operate. They operate solar-powered and on a low Wi-Fi, they don't call it low Wi-Fi, it's another system, but on a wireless system that gets the information to the mothership that broadcasts it to the network. This is how we installed them there in Joppy. We've got a great crew. Jay Smith is incredible. He's been great in terms of working out the kinks on how to do this on the ground. And this is our density pattern of where we want to set them up in Joppy and where they are now. We have 3 monitors. As of 2 weeks ago, we put up another 2. We hope to do the other 8 soon. And this is the pattern that we want to establish. Basically, north to south there aligned is what you're seeing, kind of the orientation of the map you saw before. And this is what we eventually want to do with 11 of them in Joppy, 11 of them in Paul Quinn, West Dallas, Midlothian, in Richardson, Plano. We need to be better represented in Fort Worth, but we're getting there. This is kind of the first wave, right? And this is a map as it looks now. If you were to go online and look at it, there's all kinds of icons and so on. For instance, that's a battery situation right down in Midlothian right there. And if you click on the 3, the numbers, you'll get an array of multiple monitors like this. This is the way they display up where they're sitting on a fence at UT Dallas, getting tested. This is one, if you click on a particular circle, you can get the last 24 hours, and as I said in Joppy, it's pretty bad sometimes. And that's just from 24 hours ago. And this is the same site since it first started operating on, I believe, April 15th, and again, you can see, it's been picking up a lot of stuff that the other ones did not. You can see the EPA monitors on our site. You can see Purple Air monitors on our site. You can, and by the way, all of these Purple Air, all these monitors are ours. All of them in South Dallas are ours. There's not one city monitor, there's not one EPA monitor out there at all. And you can see all of the major polluters in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And if you click on one of the black spots, then you get a most recent reading for how much pollution is coming out of that, and so on. And those little lines that aren't moving right now, those are wind lines that you'll see when Dr. Roy does his thing. And so all together, that's what it looks like. So that's our baseline. That's what we're working with. And I believe you have a show that will go into more depth than about the network itself.
So there's some overlap, but there's also some of the bigger picture as well. Okay, do you want me to do that?
Yes?
Can I stand there?
Yep.
Would you be so kind as to put my slides for me? Thank you. So thank you, Jim, for that intro. So I think it's very important to start with an acknowledgement. Although I'm the person giving this talk, I'm part of a much bigger team. And in fact, it's just now got to about 100 students that have been involved in what we're showing you here over the last 3 years. So this is similar to what Jim just showed us, but let me build it up step at a time. So for the 7.5 million of us that live in Dallas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which has been growing by 1,000 people a day, pretty much every day since 1990, this is the number of sensors we have. And echoing what Jim said, there are big areas where there are no EPA sensors. So on our live map, we bring together as much information as we can from as many sources as possible. So I want to give you a bit of an overview of that. So I started with the squares on here, the yellow squares, and they're depicting the amount of PM2.5 in micrograms per cubic meter. So that's what the little numbers correspond to. And the color of the squares changes depending on the level. So really there's no level that's good, but of all of them, yellow is the best. And so the little color scale you see in the top left of the legend, as you go through those colors, the lowest is yellow, then orange, red, purple, and so on. So you really don't want the higher colors appearing because that is really not good for our health. So one of the things with the EPA sensors, first off, it's good that they're there. They are reference monitors, so they're typically rather expensive. They cost between $100,000 and maybe $1 million, depending on how many sensors are in place. But when we did our street level surveys, like Jim showed one of them, we were measuring every meter or less as we were driving. And we did that daily over a 10 by 10 kilometer square, so that's 100 square kilometers. That drive would take 3 hours. So we did that daily for several months, and that was part of one of the PhD students' theses. And we figured out that to characterize the neighborhood scale air quality, we really needed to be measuring every half a kilometer or so. And it actually depended on the synoptic situation. So it depends the weather patterns at the time. It could vary from half a kilometer up to 7.5 kilometers. But to capture the finest scale, we really need that fine scale. So if you think of the cost involved, if everyone is $100,000 or $1 million, like, we can forget about ever putting in place a network like that. So we decided we wanted to take several parallel approaches to get as much information as we could at a reasonable price point, so that, because it's such an important societal issue, we could actually begin to make a difference. So what we did to do that, first off, was the circles now are our lower cost sensors that have been calibrated against the reference ones. Now, for the EPA data, they release the data as an hourly average with a delay of at least 2 hours. But now let's take some practical things if we wanted to use it. The absenteeism rate for schools is really quite a big deal, and it turns out that for learning outcomes, the leading cause of poor learning outcomes is absenteeism, and one of the leading causes of absenteeism is asthma. And one of the leading triggers for that asthma is exercising in the presence of pollution. So if now you're a school coach and you have a few kids in your class that have asthma, it'll be really helpful if you see what the current conditions are to decide, is, say, practice outside or inside. But if you go to look for an EPA monitor, it's probably too far away to be representative of where you are, and in addition, it's already old data by the time you see it. So if you click on any one of our sensors, you actually, so you could go to this website now, SharedAirDFW.com, and if you click on any of the circles, you will get a real-time thing to within a minute, unless there's some unforeseen issue, to within a minute of what the current conditions are, and you will see that we're actually measuring pretty much every second. And so we capture this moment-by-moment variability. So I have one of these on my back fence, and for example, when the trash truck drives down, I will momentarily get this spike up to like 200 micrograms per cubic centimeter or more, and then it's gone. But when you come to a Joppy, these high levels are persisting for long periods, because the sources are not transient like the trash truck driving by, they are persistent. And so being able to capture that and see the effect of location, so for just the 3 locations that we currently have live, you can see big differences. As you get closer to the source, you have considerably higher values, even though then there's not a huge separation between them. So soon we should have more than 100 of those, but then in addition we use the purple air monitors that you can see here as the pentagons, and then in addition the sources like Jim mentioned, but then we also add the weather radar and the winds, because one of the really helpful things is when it rains, if it's an extended period, that rain will wash so many of these particulates out. So it's really helpful to see the impact of that, and then also the wind, because the wind will be moving this air from the source to wherever the sensors are. So one of the things we hope to do next is actually to do on scale, so for every given observation, to take the current meteorological analyses and fly back trajectories. So that's answering the question, the current air reaching this particular sensor, where did it come from? And or likewise, where is it going to? So that can make it much more useful for attributing, if we want to do something about this poor air quality at this location, where has it come from? And so that helps, all of this is focused on open data for transparent, data-driven decisions. So another issue is that wherever we are, we're probably always going to want more sensors because they still have a cost associated with them. So why don't we also leverage the data we get from satellites? So we've actually here taken data from a geostationary satellite that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, have. They have 2 of these currently, actually a 3rd one has just been launched. And so we can get actually every few minutes an estimate of the airborne particulates from space using machine learning. So the sort of little schematic figures you see along the top are some of the different data sources we pull in with our machine learning. And what this particular scenario was, if I can play that again, this is when we had fires in California, and the red is very high levels of particulates, and some of those plumes would even get as far as we are in Texas, all the way from California. So we hope this will be an additional layer on our map soon. Now, all of this is actually part of a bigger system that we call MINTS. Now, MINTS is an acronym for Multi-Scale Integrated Interactive Intelligence Sensing Simulation. So that's a bit of a mouthful, so MINTS definitely is easier. And so these little schematics you see along the bottom are the different components of it. So the street level sensors, like in Joppy, are one of these sentinel types. But we also have the street level surveys, the satellites, weather radars, and autonomous robotic team and wearable sensors. So here, this is a schematic, just in case you're interested, of some of these in action. So the 3 on the top right are our autonomous robots that we recently did for Special Forces. And then there's street level simulation. So we could also actually take the exact topography of a site and for a given release show where the plume is going, acknowledging the presence of the buildings. But the guy in the middle you see with these wearable sensors, we've also been looking on the impact on the human cells. And so if you think of something like Hurricane Harvey, it's really important to start with the big picture and then zoom in. So the same for air quality. Any given situation, say Joppy or West Dallas, is embedded in a larger context. So we're wanting to bring that together both spatially and temporally, and then consider the way this physical context is impacting the social environment. So that would include a social observatory, so to look at things like school absenteeism in that context, disease incidence, mortality rates, and so on. So really we want to get, why are we doing all of this? And this map really is a good example of that. This is infant mortality by zip code across the Dallas area. And so green is encompassing 0 infant mortality, which was obviously our goal, but the red is high infant mortality. And if you notice, you can get red areas right next to green areas. So by putting this social impact in the context of the physical environment, we can begin to make much more objective decisions to reduce these unfortunate social outcomes. And if you don't take infant mortality, but look at cancer, stroke, or just any number of health outcomes, you see a very similar picture. So really, these airborne particles are like Trojan horses. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is our sensors are probably the only ones currently in use that measure down to 0.1 of a micron. So this is like the ultrafine particles of a COVID size. So we're measuring not just the accumulated amounts, but the individual size fractions. And even the EPA monitors don't measure this small. So these particles, like Jim was saying, are a little like Trojan horses for getting pollutants into our body. So when we breathe in this air, it can get deep down into our lungs and across into our blood, and then even from our blood into our brain. So there's probably 2 pathways for this, one through the lungs like we've seen already, but also across the olfactory bulb. So I don't personally do any animal experiments, but this is illustrating some that were done on rats, and within 2 weeks, these rats in a polluted environment, from the pollution, the aluminum, the silicon, the iron was embedded in their brain. So just like the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, that was the mercury getting in from the hatting process. So we've actually measured our automatic response, like there's the poor proverbial canary down the coal mine, but our body's amazing sensing systems. We're continually responding to our environment. So we wanted to see, can just from our body's response, we detect the concentration of airborne particulates? So we measure 500 times a second, 113 different measures of our autonomic response. And in the middle, you can maybe see me on a bike there with an EEG, eye tracking glasses, sweat response, heart rate, blood oxygen, 113 sensors. And following behind is a car with a lot of high-end reference instruments. And so we were able to reproduce the concentration of the particles in the air just from the biometric measurements. So on the graph in the top left, the horizontal estimated PM is the estimated PM just from the biometric sensors I was wearing, and the vertical axis is the actual measured. And so across the bottom there's a time series over 7 different collections, and the black line is the true particulate amount, and the dotted red line was the estimated just from the biometric. So our bodies are responding to our environment on a second-by-second basis. It's just we're not aware of it. So just like in the sci-fi movies, a guy goes out into space and they're wearing the suit, and the suit is alerting them and responding. That's the type of direction we could be going into, but that's a bit out there. But the takeaway for this conversation is our environment is impacting us, and so it's really good to be measuring as much as we can. So thanks, Jim.
That's why he's the technical guru of the network. I just wanted to be clear about that. All right. Yes, please. So we had the ambition to do this, right? We wanted to do this, but we would still be using purple air monitors alone had it not been for the presence of UTD as a top-tier research institute, but also this guy who is NASA trained in this technology and was already involved in this. And that was where ambition met resources, and that's how this comes to be. So without UTD, this would not be possible, and it's hard to replicate their resources and expertise around the country. And we understand that. We're very blessed with that. You have the responsibility as an elected official to then take the data that we're collecting from here and do something with it. And you've never had that before on such a scale and such density. How do you think this will impact policy making locally? We'll forget about the state for now. Let's concentrate on local politics, because this is very much about local air quality and zoning and things like that.
Absolutely.
So tell us what you think will be government's response to this.
Because now we've heard, big picture, we've heard tech picture. Well, now what does it mean to each one of us as individuals? The Dallas-Fort Worth region is about to be moved from serious to severe status by EPA, requiring stricter standards that have not been previously met. So all of us should, perk up a little bit on that. Also, it's interesting to note that with COVID, even though transportation, numbers of cars on roads appeared to decrease at certain times, the level of air quality was static. So rather than it being just from air quality being just from smog, it would appear that there are other sources on that. We all know one of the items that when I go knocking on doors talking to voters, the one issue that has salience with every door I've ever knocked on was, do you know anybody with asthma? And then they understand, and everybody says yes, in their household, neighbors, family. And because one of the areas that I've focused on is that connection between air quality and health status. Because county government is public health, public safety. So that's why, you know, to me, it made sense on my job, but it also makes sense on people. And because I go, oh, now I have a better idea what you do. One of the items, though, that really convinced me early on that we here in Dallas County had to pay attention was a map that was presented to me. And I know that you cannot see the specifics of the map, but you can tell that it is probably a map of the United States, and you can see that there's a colored portion over in the northeast. No surprise that there might be more smog there, but that there also is a hot spot in the middle of the country, which happens to be Dallas County, which is just due to luck of the Irish in a lot of different ways of confluence of a variety of factors. But so that's basically, why is this important to us as individuals? And thus, why is that important to me as an elected official who is very concerned about health status and what are the factors that impact health status? A couple of numbers on that. In 2018, DFW was ranked 16 in the American Lung Association's 25 most ozone polluted cities. That report estimates 159,000 plus cases of pediatric asthma, 422,000 cases of adult asthma, and just over 4,000 cases related to cardiovascular diseases. But you can see why that's why then when we were looking at who are vulnerable people in our population and who should get a COVID vaccination, asthmatics were included because of that vulnerable health status that they have. And I think that we're beginning to see too that there is a relationship between air quality, particulates, and that health status because of the way our bodies use air and thus bring the particulates into our body, causing havoc. Then you go into, okay, so what are we trying to do? Dallas County has tried a number of different ways. It really gets into the weeds as far as the roles of various levels of government. But Dallas County, since I've been on board, we have combated coal plants, for example. There's a ring of coal plants that are south and east of Dallas County. Many of them 50 years old, obsolete in a lot of different ways. A couple were up for foreclosure, and I was glad to say that we were a little instrumental in kind of nudging them over the edge so that they, in fact, were closed. Sad to say, not all of them went, and so we're still working on that. We are actively pursuing things like either electric or hybrid vehicles. In fact, just in the last couple of commissioners' court, you're continually recharging your fleet, and so on the new fleet that we're buying for public works and for all kinds of uses, we're going to the hybrid vehicles in order very specifically to address air quality. We've also been really targeting having LEED certified buildings. So looking at, okay, what are the things that we do as a county, and where are those areas that we in fact can have a positive impact on public health. But nothing helps us more to understand than the quality of air that we are breathing. So you put all that information together. You recognize that everything we see in the newspapers is that even though the amount of public groups, the amount of educational entities, and the amount of hardware that we're working at, that it appears that we're not gaining a lot of land, a lot of territory. So what can Dallas County be doing to use data, to use the data that's being collected more advantageously? One of the things we did, and I know it's a minor detail, but I think it's significant in the respect that the monitors report to a web page, And that webpage is hosted by Dallas County Health and Human Services. And so, as we've already noted, in case you haven't been listening, it's the SharedAirDFW.com, and you too can see the minute-by-minute collection of particulates by the monitors, the direction of the winds, and you get a very real sense of this is what's going on out there that impacts each one of us. That's, and I'm proud to say that we, stepped up and did that and made that happen. So that's good, but that's definitely not enough by a long stretch of the imagination. Part of it is because county government is one of the forms of government that just by its nature, we are always have to work with partnerships. And it's the partnerships with the university, with cities, with groups, individuals that really allow that movement forward of getting more people on the same page so that we in fact can make a greater impact. One of the things that I like to say too is that we then are able to collect data and then provide it to whether it's citizens or other entities to provide the rest of the story. It's already been hinted that maybe the state of Texas is not one of the most, I don't even want to say aggressive, not even assertive, not even at the table, partner in trying to collect data and get it back so that people can have useful data in order to make decisions about how they can do a better job with their own lives. And why is this useful to the county government? Or why is this useful to the residents of people? I've already talked a little bit about the role, because what we have to do is touch as many public entities or as many entities in the public arena, that includes private, nonprofit, et cetera, who do have a contact with people, who can disseminate information, who can provide guidance as to what are better things for us to do. There was the example provided that on bad air days, why don't you have your team exercise inside rather than outside? Because then that at least cuts down a little bit on the bad particulates that you're inhaling. But having that information in hand, it used to be on the back page of the Dallas Morning News, there was a little box, and it would just have, what is the color of the air? And it kind of went along with the shades that are on the maps right now where, yellow, that was fine. But when you knew that it got up to red and purple, you knew that you better figure out a different plan for your day. Maybe decide not to take those trips. Stay inside. Keep your kids inside, which I know is hard for them too. So part of that is trying to make those kinds of connections. So I can see where Dallas County, we're helpful in collecting the data, where we can be helpful in assisting in getting grants, getting additional funding, so that we in fact can have UTD make more monitors. We can hold entities accountable for breaking the law and polluting the air. I think there are other sessions going on in this very conference where there has been willful acts by public, private, nonprofit entities to make the decision to make a profit-provide service or to clean up the air, or at least make a decision to not dirty it any more than what it already is. I also see a very large part of what county government does is to educate, and that's to educate our people first of all. When are those days that you should be more aware of what the air quality is, and thus work towards a healthier health status? But that also means educating the other entities that are part of the equation. And that's the companies that are polluting the air. There are some tools that have been institutionalized to address that, but they must be enforced. So that I see as a responsibility, as a part of education. And that education is that guidance of what are better decisions that we can be making, because bottom line, it's controlling bad particulates coming into our body, which has a direct correlation with what our health status is, how many years we're going to live, how many days we go to work, how many days kids go to school, how many people go to the emergency room, and how many people die younger than they had to. So thank you very much, and I know we're always open for questions, and I know that there's another part coming up.
All right, thank you. Yeah, the last part here is we had these portables. We have about 5 now. We're beta testing another one from the same company, Aeroqual in New Zealand. Cindy's in charge of all of this. And with the rise of stationary monitors, I just wanted her to be here to talk about the role that us as a group or as residents would have in utilizing those portables. Why not? You know, why have a portable when you can just order a stationary monitor from these guys, get a Purple Air thing or whatever? What's the strategic and tactical reason to hang on to those portables at this point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it really boils down to the education aspect of it. I think right now we're seeing an atmosphere of mistrust of science, I would say. And I think that whenever we give that power to the people and have people out there monitoring, it brings a discussion of, once a person is the scientist, you know, and understands how that data is collected, how that data is processed, I think there's merit in terms of increasing trust towards science in that respect. But, you know, I think before I get into that, I'd like to point out that Downwinders has the largest portable air monitor library, I'd like to say in Texas, if that's not incorrect. And so whether it's a classroom that wants to monitor air, or if it's someone in the community that is curious about their air quality, they're able to come to us and be like, hey, I'm really wondering about like my air quality in my backyard because there's XYZ out there. Well, we're here to not only loan that out, but also lead training sessions with whoever is interested and teach them more about what air quality is, how you can monitor it, how the data looks like, and then also connect that one-on-one with the bigger picture of what's going on with the SharedAirDFW website. So it's almost like, yes, you can learn math by like doing 2 + 2 on a calculator, but like how does that actually work, right? So that's what our job, well, that's what I see the education committee's job is, you know, telling people how the science works.
And the Purple Airs have to be plugged in. They have to have an electrical connection, and they have to have a Wi-Fi signal. The portables do not, obviously.
Right.
They're a lot more mobile.
Right, and so that's a part of the process of explaining the difference between a portable air monitor, right, and then also a stationary whenever we're interacting with these community groups. Because we can actually show, hey, yes, it's stored in this portable air monitor. You can download it, it comes out as an Excel, this is how it looks like, and this is how Dr. Laurie's machine also works, but on a much larger scale, and it does it automatically. But being able to see that step-by-step process, I think really gives a different lens to people who are interested in this.
So before I open up to questions, I wanted to say something about the City of Dallas effort, because originally they were part of this network, and then about 2 or 3 years ago, they decided to leave and do their own thing. And they just announced that they had, well, there's actually 2 grants in process. One would give West Dallas's 2 zip codes 5 monitors, mainly PM. And by the way, these are Aeroqual machines from New Zealand. And the other one would have a grant for about 26 new monitors, most of them about the quality that you see here with the UTD motherships, but also 6 that are coming with their own meteorological tower, wind, you know, a little bit fancier rigs. So they are getting their own network together. They haven't decided how they're going to display the data or any details about how this is going to be presented, but we've invited them back into the fold to see if they would become part of the network and post the data there and so on. If at least you're not going to use the monitors, plug in the data so that everybody can see it. We want to be a regional network and have the availability to have everybody check in at once, and it's a one-stop site, so you can see EPA, Purple Air, our thing, Dow, so you don't have to look around. If you were to try right now to find those EPA monitors online, it would take you a while, I would bet, even those of you with college degrees, because they're not easy to find online, and it's not by accident they are not easy to find. We are the one place that makes them easy to find, and so we would hope the city of Dallas would at least join the network, be open source, and be able to show their monitors on this map. I'm not sure what their dashboard is going to look like, but if you go upstairs to the exhibit hall, you'll see an example of the mothership, a solar-powered one that we have, and also the dashboard. Each one of these monitors, I expected you to show an example of this. They have their own monitor. It's like mission control up there. Each monitor has their own screen with a dashboard that you'll see up there that has the different sizes of particulate matter and color-coded, radiation measurements and such, just wind direction, speed, humidity, everything that you need to know. And that information will also be going up by the end of the semester. There's a whole group of students just doing that kind of stuff and adding to that software component. So anyway, there's a lot going on at this last semester's worth of push that will show up in the map there in the next couple of months, I think. Questions? We have about 10 minutes for questions about the technology or capability. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for your advocacy for 3+ decades, and thank you for bringing your technological suave. Quick question for you. I'm going to use different numbers, but I think they're generally in line. I'm just going to use the numbers I'm familiar with. We're at 8.1 million, going to 10.2 million in DFW in the next 15 years. Have you reverse engineered and forward engineered to say, if we don't make any changes when we add 2 million more people to DFW, what these charts will look like? That's the first part of the question. That's an engineering question. And the second one is, and maybe for a different person, if you could give the commissioner or somebody at the city government level a point reference to the 1 or 2 big dials to focus on, such that that trend, whatever it might be most highly affected, what would they be? So it's 2 questions.
So it's a good thought. I haven't projected that out. One thing about which dial, and it's good to take a step back, because when those street level surveys, what wasn't obvious to us but became absolutely obvious once we started doing this at scale, is the small spatial and temporal scale variability. So it's very easy to think of air quality as a more static thing, of this is what it is, but it's changing on a moment by moment basis for a fixed location, but also spatially around that location. So if we just take an everyday example, I think will make it come home. Supposing it's lunchtime, you're a little hungry, and there's a really good bakery around the corner that does these great sandwiches you like. If you were to walk out of your house and go towards it, you would probably go in and out of the plume of the bakery. Like every so often, you catch that lovely smell, and then you don't. So that's the same with the air quality. It's not, we don't see it per se, because we don't have eyes that see the particulates, but if you have a lot of them, the light scattering gives you that haze look. But they're continually changing. That's why the need for the monitoring. And if you reduce the sources, the levels can go down very quickly as a result of that. So the empowering thing about this is, just because we have bad air quality today at a given location doesn't mean it has to stay that way. If we do something about the sources, and simple things like if you have SO2 releases or the rest of it from some of these facilities, if you have scrubbers and put those remediation things in place, you will very quickly see a drastic reduction. So the amount of pollution in the air is very much tied to the magnitude of the source and how far away it is from us. So, do you want to say something?
Well, it's a great question, but look, the population's been increasing. Air quality has been getting better. It's just also that we know more about it, and so the standards are going down at the same time. We're kind of chasing our own tail in that respect, not finding unsafe levels further and further below what used to be safe. But there are trends, besides that trend that you cited, there's also the trend toward buying more EVs. And while they're not a panacea, they reduce particulate matter quite a bit. You only have to worry about brake pads and tires after that, not combustion. So that's a remedy that, depending on market penetration, could help offset that population rise and so forth. So you have things getting more efficient at the same time population growth, and that seems to be the way it's worked out so far. We've not had the explosion of air pollution you might expect. We've kind of kept it level, but it's a level that keeps us in violation of the current standard. So we aren't doing enough. And it's not these guys. The counties, actually, there's a lot of, the county is caught in the middle between the city and the state. The state has not had an interest in air quality in about 20 years, a serious interest in air quality. In fact, they go out of their way not to have a serious interest in air quality, I have found. To such an extent that we just quit going to Austin. It's just not useful for us to participate in state legislative politics or TSEC politics anymore, just because it's so out of control. So in fact, that's one of the reasons why we refocused on local stuff. We felt like we had more control over our own fates air-wise by working with local governments than state and federal ones. If I was to cite one thing that's really missing it's the one thing that county has that city doesn't though. County has a public health department with staff, and they have a perspective of public health that, I don't know whether it does or not, but it should be intervening in all the policy matters. Right. That public health perspective should be at the table. Dallas City Hall doesn't have that yet. Even with the acquisition of these monitors, they don't have anybody on staff that can tell you what the implications of those levels are, and they don't have that point of view represented at the table. This is something that all the environmental justice groups upstairs that are represented at this conference have asked for about 3 or 4 years now, is for somebody to be on staff, to be a toxicologist, Houston has this. They have a person that works, there's a toxicologist at Rice, who's also the city toxicologist, I believe, or county. And she goes out and makes these incredible speeches advocating against batch plants in places like Joplin and so forth, because they're already overburdened with pollution. Can you imagine anybody from Dallas City Hall doing that right now? There is nobody like that. And so we need that public health perspective represented there in the city of Dallas, and City Hall isn't represented in the way now.
Yeah, so could I add to that? So what I think would be helpful if you were wanting a single dial, maybe instead of a single dial, a couple of things in concert. The levels of pollution, and at the same time the absenteeism rate, or some of these other social measures that are being directly impacted by the pollution. I think those two together, which is what we were trying to get with the social environmental observatory, I think that is impactful.
Well, eventually, it'll be, right, the capitalists will catch on that its productivity is declining because of poor air quality, and they want to make sure the PM levels are low today to get the most out of their employees. So eventually, it'll become that kind of thing. You have to just make that connection the way that he's suggesting to do that. Do you all have any comments about what?
Yeah, the first part of your question, and there have been a variety of studies done on what will be the growth of the Dallas-Fort Worth area between now and 2045. And in looking at roads, transportation, housing, jobs, it does not take much to see it just explodes. And so that rather than, the 6 counties, it now takes in more like 8-10 counties. It's not totally even, so that you can see which communities tend to be growing, so that you can in fact make some kind of a projection of where you might want to put air monitors. The bulb takes it away, takes that need away, but where you might want to be focusing your attention. So I know I've got a lot of that information if you'd like to see that.
Okay. Other questions people might have about the technology, software, how you could buy your very own?
I'm going to buy mine very own. Can I?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually, that's part of what we're trying to do. The reason I mentioned like 100 students were involved is not just the educational thing, but the infrastructure to set something like this up. It sounds very easy until you come to do it, and it's a little daunting.
Tell me about it.
So what we're trying to do
There's
is
no outlet.
we want to partner with others to facilitate. So like the city of Plano came to us and said, will you build us a network? So we gladly did that, and also then the back-end infrastructure. So the threshold for communities or cities or individuals getting involved is very low. It's just, this is what you need for one more sensor. But then once you plug it in, it's part of the bigger picture, and we all benefit each other because we're downwind of this place today, but tomorrow they're downwind of us.
We used to reference this metaphor a lot more than we do now, but it's like building a new utility from scratch, if you think about it. It's a whole, and we've become a utility provider. We own a piece of jobby real estate. We had to buy our own utility pole to put the mothership up on because we couldn't find, the city wouldn't cooperate and give us a pole or anything out there, so we bought our own. And we put it up on there, we wired and so on. We've become a utility company, basically, in that respect. And that's what this network is about, is providing a new utility service. We have to kind of look at it that way, and governments have to look at it that way. There was a Wild West period when I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures, but like there were 10 electric companies in every town, right? And everybody had their own wires, blah, blah, blah. That all got settled down and taken in as a responsibility of government to regulate that, if not provide that in some cases. Same thing is true here. This will eventually be incorporated into the EPA system. Monitors like the ones we're building will be classified as EPA monitors, certified by that. That is coming. They are working on that criteria now. And that is our goal as a network, is to become EPA certified and have these monitors become then regulatory monitors that you can take to court. Right now, all we can do is raise hell with them and try to use them in the same way that EPA can. But once they're certified, EPA can take the industries to court and so on. They can use this information officially. And that's where we're headed. We want to be so good with our protocol, with our science and so forth, that we are first in line to get that certification. So that is our goal. Yes, ma'am.
In trying to do my personal part to, decrease my own personal waste, I went electric for my vehicle. However, living in the southern sector has been quite a challenge. One, housing that has garages, for those of us that don't have the privilege of being homeowners. And two, charging networks. My car in particular has different superchargers that are available, all of them being in either the north or going towards the west. There is not a single supercharger in the southern sector, and even trying to find a charger point blank period has been living hell. So my question is how do we encourage people to contribute to doing their part when there's such a burden and such an obstacle for them to do that?
Thank you very much for that very insightful question. And that question, that how do we move forward with this stuff? There's an offer of quite a bit of federal money to work on a statewide network of charging stations. And right at the moment, we are twiddling our thumbs, waiting impatiently for the state to put together the state plan, which is the first step. I have been told that the state plan should be out, I think it's in July of this year. We're doing our gentle nudging to say, if you start knocking down those barriers, so that in fact we can have a system, a network of chargers. Because I was just thinking, what if you didn't want to drive to Austin? I'm not sure that I would do it today, just because, can I make it? And if I do make it, am I going to be running on zero? So that's where we are in the process. And part of it is also looking at localities and because now they're popping up at grocery stores and some other kind of public places. I've been asked as a county government, in addition to providing charging stations for our employees, what about providing public? There is a statewide organization that I'm a member of right now, and it's a membership of counties to unite to see if you know, together we're stronger kind of a thing, to encourage the state, push the state is probably what I'd like to say, to speed it up because of the need for those kinds of, I wanted to say amenities, but it's a way, it's transportation. Get real about this. It's a way of, and then being conscious of what impact our transportation has on our lives in so many, many different ways. So that's kind of what I know right now, but please, I love to take a constituent note and say, this person's been contacting me and they say, what are you doing about this? So then I have a little bit more oomph to say, it's not just me being a squeaky wheel, it's a lot of us needing a response for our health status.
And that would be an opportunity also to have air quality monitoring of each of those charges.
What an opportunity. I love it.
Meanwhile, get a battery wall. Right? This is, you're on your own. Yeah, no, it's pathetic, a number of those things south of 30 and the Trinity, right? They're all, obviously it's all being driven by the same demographic information that drives grocery stores and Walgreens and everything else that's not in Southern Dallas. So that's one of the things that has to change, is that they have to redo those demographics, because we all know Southern Dallas ain't like it. It is not uniformly like that. And there are all kinds of people down there. People have an idea of Southern Dallas is just totally, I don't know whether it was ever true, but it's certainly not true now. And that has to be the number. I mean, once you get over that and realize that Southern Dallas is a lot more people-wise like the rest of Dallas, you know, that's one thing. They may not have all the income that North Dallas has or all the amenities, but they're people with middle-class incomes and better living in South Dallas perfectly great places. If you look at the Cedars, you know, you'll look at an industrial building and inside will be these luxury condo lofts with their own saunas and things. It's not the South Dallas of 40 or 50 years ago. That whole area is changing and changing pretty rapidly, and they're full of people like Stacy and city workers and firefighters and so on who are trying to still live in the city and be, you know, tax-paying citizens of Dallas instead of having to move away. And we should be providing for that in all kinds of ways, with housing, with charging stations, with all kinds of amenities. But that is part of a larger problem that we cannot address here in this time. But, you know, this is part of why there's an environmental justice problem at all. It's the same system.
Just because there's an issue does not mean that we're going to stop.
It's a symptom of the same manifestation.
Absolutely, we're just going to keep on moving forward, keep on fighting.
Anything else? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, Dr. Daniel. It's a question mainly for county government. As you know, I teach government, and you have in the past as well, and you're currently an elected official. And the state constitution does give the county the public health authority. So I'm wondering, what can we as citizens do to help get more money to the county? If the city has deficiencies or funding issues, whatever, the county has, I guess, the primary responsibility. So how can we get more resources to the county government, maybe through infrastructure money or state money? What are the political challenges that we face in getting the county the resources that it needs to do even more than what you're doing?
Well, obviously, groups like the Downwinders are excellent because they bring to the forefront, they put on the agenda the discussion of the impact of dirty air on health status and how that chugs through the system, and, you know, work days and how it impacts business, classroom days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, speaking up is one thing. But, you know, I was in one of the other sessions, and part of it is we've got to change our attitudes. We have one model of you know, what's a way to address housing stock? Well, it's tax credits, of course. That's the only way that we can affect housing stock? That's first of all, that begs the question of the classic economic model, that it's only business that counts. Second of all, what about all the individuals using housing? Why can't we figure out a way to stimulate home ownership? development of apartments for congregate living. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects, and a lot of it is just our attitudes that we've been fed, and we have this mantra of what's possible, what's acceptable, what's whatever, without really trying to match it up to what's the problem and how do we address it. So I would love to sit down with you and see what we could do to figure out what are some of the items that people see as things that are understandable. Like when I go knocking on doors, I talk about asthma because that's a public health issue and people get it. Why don't we use that kind of an example to make it real, to make it palatable, to make this map something that means something to people, because, I mean, this map has been true for way too long, and I don't see it getting any better in the near future either. So I would love to get together with you and see what we can do to make a public educational piece out of that, to have people start asking questions. What the heck are we doing if we're not really addressing the issues?
Well, just generally speaking, right, we have a whole project devoted to grassroots neighborhood planning that hopefully reverses some of the racist zoning. But how do you do that without inviting developers how do you clean up the neighborhood and still make it affordable for the people who were getting shat on beforehand? It acts as a disincentive for them to do anything about it, because the moment they start cleaning the neighborhood up, here comes the loft and condos, that now that it's safe to live there, the developers are coming right behind it. So we've got to figure out, as part of these neighborhood plans, how to protect the people who are living there now around GAF. Say that we're totally successful in getting rid of that shingle factory. That's going to be a signal for developers to move in unless the neighborhood already has a stake in what's going on and can protect their vision of that. And that's what that's the real trap that we fall into. All up and down the Trinity River, as things get more dense in the inner city, how do we keep the cultural, like Joppy, I mean, how does Joppy remain Joppy if you have beige and gray condos by the riverside like you do across this, in West Dallas? It just ain't Joppy anymore. So how do you retain the cultural heritage, the cultural placeness of these things while still managing, to clean them up? That's a big question for us. We've got to go. I think we're running out of time. Thank you all. Go upstairs and see the exhibits. Talk to this guy. See us anytime. You can find this online, SharedAirDFW.com. Please check it out. It's a great resource. Thanks.